Let me bring in a purist. Jay Bilas, ESPN college basketball analyst. How would you answer that when people say Jokic is boring?
If you think greatness is boring, what are you going to do? It's kind of like Ben Crenshaw was a boring putter. He just made them all. Like, what are you going to say?
Yeah. This is what I deal with, though, Jay, every day. I can only do so much entertaining a nation in these 3 hours. And I did make the Danettes aware of one of your great acting performances. You were in The White Shadow, and you were in high school, I believe, at the time. No lines in there, but you did give me the smirk that led me to believe that you could have been a great Duke basketball player. After seeing that smirk as if it was a bad call or Coach K's yelling at you, explain how you got the role in one of our favorite shows, The White Shadow.
Well, that was my high school basketball team that played the opposing team to Carver High School in that episode. And one of my high school teammates, Matt Baker, who I grew up playing with, his father, Dick Baker, was the head coach at Loyola Marymount years ago and was a technical consultant for the show, The White Shadow, because of his basketball experience. And he had been an extra in all these, great shows back then, like Mannix and the $6 Million Man and all this stuff. And so he got us on the show, and I just happened to be the one that they picked for the coach to yell at. Apparently, I had that kind of face that, and it was also foreshadowing for my college career when that was basically every halftime and post game of my college career that Coach K would wear me out. But that was 1979, I think, and none of us knew that was The White Shadow. You remember, was one of the most popular shows on television. And none of us knew that all the guys in that show were like in their 30s. And we had no idea. We thought Coolidge was our age or Salami was our age. And we're talking to these guys. They're lighting up a cigarette in between takes. And we're going, yeah, my mom's picking me up after this. How are you getting home?
Could Coolidge play?
He was the only one that could. They had on the soundstage where those games were, the court was really small. And they would just run the camera on a dolly opposite the direction the team was coming, so it made it look like it was a regular court. And then they had a ramp for the guys to dunk off of. But Coolidge was really the only guy that could play. And then they had a guy that would come in named Wolf Perry who played for Stanford and was a great player. But he wasn't, I don't think, one of the regulars on the show. But the other guys couldn't play dead.
Did you get paid?
I don't remember. I don't think we did. I was later a member of the Screen Actors Guild because I'd done commercial work, and then I did a movie. I played an alien cop in a movie in the late 80s, but I don't remember whether we got paid. It was only a couple of days that we did that, and we were extras. We might have gotten a few bucks, but I just don't remember.
Wasn't the line, I leave in peace, I go in peace, I leave in peace, you leave in pieces, or something like that?
Yeah, so the movie, this was in the 80s, late 80s. It was called I Come in Peace. It was originally entitled Dark Angel. It was a Dolph Lundgren movie, and I played an alien cop that was chasing around an alien drug dealer. So the alien drug dealer's line was, before he killed somebody, was I come in peace. He was a lying alien in addition to being a drug dealer. But my lines were, I had a death scene in the back of a car that really brought tears to everyone's eyes. Just an amazing, Sir Laurence Olivier complimented me on it, thought it was better than the death scene in Camille. So it was, the only bad part is I couldn't be in the sequel.
But did you have lines?
Oh yeah, I had a lot of lines. I got like, I think they call it single card credit back then. And it was such a bizarre thing for me to have gotten that part in the movie. And I was so giddy about it. Like, I had been handed this golden ticket type of deal. And then I realized afterwards that movie was a big break for a lot of actors that were in the film. And I was, early on, I was treating this like it was some kind of lark. And then I took it a lot more seriously after that, when I realized, hey, these guys, this is their career. And for me, I kind of just got lucky.
Is that a volleyball over your right shoulder?
No, it's a basketball. My wife is a professional artist, and when the pandemic hit, and this is my home studio where I do, Sports Center hits, stuff like that. And so when I was up here all the time, she just decided if I was going to be stranded in my studio, I ought to have some. If I was going to be like Tom Hanks in Castaway, I ought to have some company. So she painted me my own Wilson.
And you have
it's a basketball though.
A Patriots helmet?
Yes, there's actually a story behind that. When it was probably about 10, 12 years ago, I was playing golf with a friend of mine. He has a mutual friend that happened to be Tom Brady and his father, Tom Sr. And we were playing golf in South Carolina, and Tom Brady Sr. asked me, "Hey, we're flying out of Charlotte tomorrow. Can you recommend a hotel?" And I told him, "Hey, look, why don't you stay with me? My wife and family are out of town. We're moving to a new house soon, so it's a mess. But I'll take you to the airport in the morning." And so I wound up putting Tom Sr. in my daughter's room, and then I was going to put the Super Bowl MVP Tom Jr. in our guest room. And he said, "No, I don't want to mess it up." And I'm like, "Dude, we're moving. It's going to be messed up tomorrow anyway." And he said, "No, I'll sleep in this room." And he picked my son's room. My son was like 11, and he had a twin bed in there. And so, okay, I'm not going to argue with him. So he slept in the bed. The next day, my wife calls, and I said, "You won't believe this, but Tom Brady stayed overnight here." And my son was like, "Are you kidding me? He wasn't there. I wasn't there." So I come home from work one day, probably a week later, and he's watching an old rerun of the Brady Bunch. Remember the Brady Bunch?
Yeah.
And he's watching on Nickelodeon. And he says to me, and he's like all mad, and he says, "Everything works out for the Brady Bunch." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Marsha lies about knowing Davy Jones, and Davy Jones takes her to the prom. Bobby lies about knowing Joe Namath, and Joe Namath comes to his house." And he goes, "Tom Brady slept in my bed, and nobody believes me." And I thought that was the funniest thing. And I called this buddy of mine that knew Brady. I told him the story. We got a laugh over it. And about 10 days later, this helmet comes to the house. And it's signed to my son, Anthony. It says, "To Anthony, you have the best bed in Charlotte, Tom Brady 12."
I like it.
And I was like, that is the coolest thing anybody's ever done for a kid. I couldn't believe how nice that was. And anybody says anything mean about Brady, I'm always like, no, you can dislike him as a player, but that's one straight up good dude.
He's Jay Bilas. We were going to talk college basketball,
and I ruined it.
Yeah, no, this was better because I've watched college basketball this year, but I don't know anything about college basketball. I know Gonzaga and Baylor, Michigan, but then I thought I knew Michigan, and I watched Illinois without their best player dominate them. So if you were going to give the Cliff Notes version to somebody right now, a couple of weeks before Selection Sunday, what would you say?
I would say that Gonzaga and Baylor and Michigan are the three best teams, but they're the three best teams because they're not only really good and can win the whole thing, but they're the highest level consistent, absent that performance last night by Michigan, where they just weren't prepared for a fight. And Big Ten team, the Big Ten is the best conference. They've got the most depth of teams that can make a Final Four, but teams like Florida State, can certainly do some damage. Houston's pretty good and can do some damage in the tournament. The one thing, Dan, that I would caution sounds like the wrong word, but that I would remind people is because of the pandemic, we didn't have non-conference games where the little guy could show how good they are. And so we're going to have some seeds in this thing where the little guy is way better than we think. And because we don't have the data of those games against the big shots. And so it seems like they're not as good, but I'm not convinced that's true. I think we're going to have some volatility in this tournament that's going to come from us just not having seen the data of early season games where the little guy got to take a swing at the big guy. And that's maybe that's going to be delicious and wonderful, or maybe it's going to really piss us off. I don't know what's going to happen.
But I'm also wondering, people rail against Duke or Kentucky or Indiana, Duke and Kentucky, but if they're not in the tournament or Michigan State's not in there, is it a better tournament if other teams get an opportunity to be on center stage as opposed to the normal blue bloods?
I would say, there's a yes and no to that question. I think more people, it's almost like if you have a World Series where you have two small market teams playing the World Series and the ratings are really low. It's great to see those teams compete, but at the same time, not as many people are interested. So without Duke, Kentucky, if Michigan State doesn't keep winning, maybe Michigan State doesn't make it. Kansas is firmly in the field, but Kansas isn't as good as they've been in the past. They didn't win the Big 12. Baylor won it. I think the tournament will be diminished in a way. But it's kind of like I liken it to when Tiger Woods shot 81 in the British Open in that horrible weather that one year. It was compelling. It was compelling to watch that, and I think it would be compelling even to watch these teams struggle if they're not as good. But I don't think we're gonna. I mean, we're clearly not going to have Kentucky. There's no way they're gonna win their tournament to pull this out. And we're probably it's 50-50 whether we have Duke. I think Michigan State will probably make it. I know Kansas will make it, but it's been a really odd year.
What kind of pros are we looking at in the tournament? Future pros.
Well, we've got some really good ones like Cade Cunningham, Oklahoma State. I think they're going to make it, even though they're under a 1-year postseason ban. It's really bizarre from that whole FBI thing. The most minimal of issues got them a postseason ban, but it's under appeal. And as odd as this sounds, if the appeals committee doesn't hear and rule on the appeal by the tournament, Oklahoma State's going to play. Cade Cunningham's going to be the first pick.
Okay.
He had 40 the other night in a game against Oklahoma. He's the real deal. He's really good. Jalen Suggs of Gonzaga, another sort of one and done player. And everybody seems to be okay with one and done when it's at Gonzaga. They just don't like it at Kentucky or Duke. Like, it's so weird. Like, he goes and he's a great kid, but some of these other guys, but Gonzaga, it's not an issue, but it's an issue at Kentucky and Duke. That's being blamed for Kentucky and Duke's problems this year, as if the last 10 years didn't exist. And this is the only data point we have of one and done. But there are a bunch of really good pros that we're going to have. And Corey Kispert at Gonzaga, even though he's a senior, I think is a lottery pick and is probably undervalued as a truly great player in basketball. That I think he's going to play, if he stays healthy, 10, 12 years in the league and be an outstanding player.
Is Garza at Iowa? Is he Jeff Rulin 2.0?
Different. Back, how different the game was back then. I think Luka Garza is going to play in the NBA. His limitations are real, though. Like, he's not a defender. He doesn't play above the rim. He doesn't finish above the rim. But he can step away and knock down shots, and he's a really good player. But it's kind of like a Tyler Hansbrough type thing. Like, Hansbrough was a great college player. Luka Garza is a great college player. Hansbrough was a serviceable pro, and I think that Garza will be better as a pro because he can step away and knock down an NBA three, which Hansbrough was not proficient at. But he doesn't get up and down the floor the way you would hope he could. And he's not a shot blocker. He's not a high volume rebounder. And in pick and roll situations, he's going to get attacked. But that doesn't mean he can't play. It just means it's going to be an issue for him in being a great player at that level.
There's a poll out. Well, it's a list. I hate lists, but I still read them. This is SB Nation, had the top 50 college basketball teams of all time, what they did in that individual season. And North Carolina State is the fifth best with David Thompson, 1974. North Carolina with Michael and Perkins and Worthy. That's four. Duke in 1992. Indiana undefeated is number 2 on that list, 1976. And then Bill Walton's first year as a starter at UCLA, 1972, is the number 1 team of all time. Any issues with that?
How could you not have a UCLA team with Lou Alcindor not on that list of at least the top 5? I mean, I find that laughably absurd. And when the pandemic started, we did at ESPN the greatest college basketball player of all time bracket, and they had men and women, and
I didn't
and all
do
that.
well with this, Jay. I was angry, and I even
I was
too. Like, Michael Jordan is not the Kareem is the best
No.
player of all time.
Exactly.
Not even close. Not even close.
It's not close. It's not any metric you want to use. It's not close. And look, I get it when fans vote on that stuff, but give me a break. I mean, and if we're going to do these lists, like, the truth is UCLA would be the top 8, they were so dominant and so good, and having back to back. I remember one time that somebody at Duke, frankly, that and it was while Leitner and Grant Hill and Bobby Hurley and Thomas Hill were there. I was a grad assistant, and somebody had said something about UCLA about, well, of course Wooden won so many. He had Alcindor and Walton. And I go, okay, that's 5. He won 5 others, and without those guys.
Yeah.
And I was really sensitive because I grew up in Los Angeles, and people always said stuff like that to put down UCLA, like, wow, there's West Coast back then. They didn't have to beat anybody to get to the Final Four. And I'm like, well, nobody beat them once they got there. Like, how did that not happen?
And he won a title with maybe the smallest lineup to ever win a title.
In 64, you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did it in 64. Then after Alcindor left, he won in 70 and 71
Steve
before
Patterson.
Walton got there.
Yeah, Steve Patterson.
And Curtis Rose, Sidney Wicks, all those guys. I mean, that was an extraordinary run. But Alcindor was the best player, and those teams, like, I don't care what Mike Warren was the point guard for Alcindor's teams. And are you telling me like with Alcindor out there that they couldn't have beat some of the teams on that list? They absolutely would have done. And it wasn't that far removed from when Indiana won in 76 that we couldn't compare those teams. We could.
Great to talk to you as always, Jay. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll talk to you here real soon.
Yeah, if you want any more stories about some of the other helmets, I can waste all your time with it. Just
I like
let me
it.
know.
I like it. It's great for radio. People on radio really appreciate that when you talk about something visual, Jay, as only you can. Thank you, bud.